You know, I've been here over a quarter century now, believe it or not. And when I arrived, I remember getting a book that had just come out, and the book was entitled Ecological Literacy. And that book, I think, had a big impact on the way people were thinking about environmental education. And I started taking note of this author, Dr. David Orr, and began watching him as he moved along in his career and watching what he wrote, the things he was doing. I was always so very much impressed with all the things I heard and saw. And I have been in the audience for probably at least 10 talks around different parts, different conferences, and I've always learned a lot. You know, he always has a wholly different way of thinking about things, and that's what really gets you excited. And so I'm very excited to have him here. And so I'm going to take a minute and read some of the things about him to be sure that you understand the magnitude of the work he's done. He's a Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics Emeritus. He's also served as the counselor to the president of Oberlin College for a decade. He is the author of 8 books, including Dangerous Years, Climate Change and the Long Emergency, and Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse, and co-editor of 3 others. He has authored more than 220 articles, reviews, book chapters, and professional publications. And in the past 25 years, he's served as a board member or advisor to 10 foundations and on the boards of many organizations, and they're organizations that are doing major work, such as the Rocky Mountain Institute, Bioneers, and the Aldo Leopold Foundation. He's currently a trustee of the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, the Children in Nature Network, and World Watch Institute. He has been awarded 9 honorary degrees and a dozen other awards, including a Lyndhurst Prize, a National Achievement Award from the National Wildlife Federation, and leadership awards from the U.S. Green Building Council and from Second Nature, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from Green Energy Ohio and the North American Association for Environmental Education. That's a lot. He has lectured at hundreds of colleges and universities. In fact, we were riding over here, and I think he was telling me that you had 1,500 lectures now. Isn't that amazing? That's a lot of work, and he's a very dedicated person. He's headed the effort to design, fund, and build the Adam Joseph Lewis Center, which was built about the same time we built this building, which was named by an AIA panel in 2010 as the most important green building of the past 30 years, as one of 30 milestone buildings of the 20th century by the U.S. Department of Energy, and as one of the 52 game-changing buildings of the past 170 years by the editors of Building, Design, and Construction. He was instrumental in the design and funding of the platinum-rated Peter B. Lewis Gateway Center. He's founder of the Oberlin Project, a founder of the journal Solutions. His current work is on the state of American democracy. And he's got, and that includes a publication of a co-edited book, Democracy Unchanged, Politics as If All People Matter. And I believe that comes out soon. February. So at this time, I'd like one of my favorite lecturers to come up here, Dr. David Orr.
I am wired here with this. Should I turn this one off? The acronym for State of American Democracy, by the way, is SAD, which summarizes a whole lot of stuff. It's really nice to be here. And this is, Michael and I were talking about what's your best guess when I was here last time? It was 1830. It's been a while. Can you hear me all right now? Is that better? Okay. Do you want to hear me? That's the next question. This is it's so nice to be back here. All my family roots are from North Carolina, the Charlotte area, and so this is Charlotte, and coming back here is kind of homecoming for me. But I would say give a shout out to John, where it sounds like a mutual admiration society, and it is. This is an incredible building. You built an incredible program, and the best is yet to come. You build a platform that Luke and others can move ahead and do the incredible things that we really need to have done. This is, we're up for final exams here, and this is the time to do great things. So it's really nice to be here. And Fred and Alice stand back here in the front row, longtime friends, and Hayes and Keenan Smith and Jed Moody. I mean, there's just a lot of good people here that make the world go and make the world a lot better. And it's nice to be in a place like Salisbury. What do you...
My husband can't hear. Can we turn it up a little bit, Mike?
I tell you, I don't turn it up, but somebody back here does turn it up.
Thank you, I apologize.
Would it be better to use the other mic? Is that... Okay. So anyway, it's really nice to be here, and since the last, since Michael had me here, probably early 90s, I guess that was, so much has happened here, and this is a gorgeous building. This is an absolutely wonderful learning space. I've asked if they could give me a little bit of space for an office, so I plan to move down here, and you ain't getting rid of me easy. I want to talk about politics, and there are three hazardous things you don't really want to talk about: politics, religion, and sex. I'm not going to talk about sex, I mean, unless I get carried away. Politics and religion are kind of related in some ways, but I want to talk about politics, and this is a good time to begin thinking about politics. I understand today we've got an impeachment proceeding now more or less impending. This is a time to rethink what we do and to think very clearly about what we do. Now, what I want to do is to connect two big things. If I had two curves to think of, you think of the Keeling curve, which is the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that curve is going up, that sawtooth curve going up like that. And that curve is true. That's hard fact. Nobody that knows anything about science disputes that curve. And then you have another curve that's falling in the other direction. It's the dropping cost of solar energy and wind energy and efficiency and so forth. So that curve comes down like that. The Keeling curve goes up like that. Now, both curves are true. On the falling cost of the renewable energy, we put in a 2.2 or 2.27 megawatt solar array 5 years ago. And it penciled out just fine for the Board of Trustees 5 years ago. It was a good deal. But if we had done it last year or this past summer, it would have cost us about 40% of what it cost us 5 years ago. That's how fast things are changing. Now, the problem we have is this. Think of those as bookends for our human situation. One is, oh my God, that's the Keeling curve. We've never been here before. 414 parts per million or whatever, give or take a part or two. Humans have never been on the planet when it was that high. The last time the atmosphere held that much carbon, the oceans were a whole lot higher, and it didn't take a lot of time to get there. That was so. But the other curve is true too, and it's the curve of human ingenuity in the face of impending calamity. Both curves are true. They are not equally important at this time. So while one curve says we can get out of this, we can maybe improve our situation dramatically. That's the efficiency, solar building, making buildings that power themselves and cars that operate on, electricity and so forth. We can do all those things. But that doesn't mean, and I'll explain why this is the case, that doesn't mean that the other curve is irrelevant. It is the curve that we have to deal with. That's the Keeling curve in carbon. Now, the question then is trying to join democracy, which I want to get to in just a moment, democracy and climate change. The first thing about climate change is what kind of issue is this? And we have four choices. On one hand, Americans like to think of technology as solving problems. We're great at technology. We are at our best when we're being pragmatic and practical and figuring out how to solve things that are problems that are solvable. So our first impulse about climate change is technological. And then related to that, there is another side of this. It says, well, it's all economic. If we just get the prices of things right, a carbon tax or whatever, then we'll move. And those are not unrelated. Both of those are responses to a situation, but they tell you nothing about the cause of it. So if you want to reckon with the cause of climate change, then you have to go over into a different realm. And that realm is politics. We knew, at least as far back as 1965, when Lyndon Johnson got the first warning as U.S. president that climate change was a serious issue. We actually knew even before that. And Svante Arrhenius, the Swedish scientist, had figured all this stuff out, very painstaking calculations long before there were computers. In 1898, his calculations on if you burn this much carbon, you'll heat the planet this much are still ballpark accurate. So we've known for a long time. So why didn't we act? We knew enough to act a long time ago. And think about going down a highway. We're passing off-ramps to better destinations than what is dead ahead of us. But we've known this for a long time. And there was a time, if you're as old as I am, there was a time in the 1970s. I worked for Jimmy Carter when he was governor of Georgia as a consultant and then on his transition team as a minor part of it. But we knew in 1976, Carter came into the office one day in 1976. He was up by 6 or 8 points from over Gerald Ford at that time. And he came in and asked if I would do a paper on the most important environmental issue his administration would face. And so it was energy policy. Energy is the way it connects to everything else, including climate. So we pulled together a group of people that included Amory Lovins and Eugene Odom and Herman Daly and a lot of good people. And we went off to a place called Wolf Creek Lodge, and we studied the issue for a weekend, came out with something called the Wolf Creek Statement. And it got some press at the time, but that paper still reads well. That paper still reads well. That was written in 1976. We still do not have a de jure climate policy. It's still kind of pedal to the metal. We're trying to figure out how we can grow as fast as we can, but we want to do it a little bit smarter. Now, there's a fourth way to think about this, and that is as a moral issue. And so more and more the press coverage of Greta Thunberg and other people is that this climate issue is a moral issue. So here, what's the issue? Is it economic or technological or political or spiritual? Well, of course it's all four. It has all four elements to it. Now, democracy. Democracy is a funny thing. It is a hard thing to do. No democracy has lasted very well without major crises, and some don't last at all. Classical Greek democracy lasted maybe 4 or 5 decades, and then it just blew itself up. James Madison thought democracies always ended because they committed suicide. They killed themselves. It wasn't outside enemies. It was people that just couldn't get together, and things got so bitter, and they just destroyed it. That was Madison's belief. So democracies are tough things, and what it really is. Think of democracy as a shell or an arena. And the point is to keep the game going. Nobody wins, not ultimately. Once you have one party taking over, then you don't have democracy anymore. And there's certain rules you have to abide by. And the rules aren't Democratic or Republican or liberal or conservative. They're simply the rules of a game. Think of a football game where no rules, no referees, and the team show up with Uzis and hand grenades. Hey, that's not football anymore. That's war. And so once the rules are suspended, once that container is broken, and you think of the issues, freedom versus equality, which has bedeviled American society. That's a tough thing for us. And think of these as opposite ends, just a point on a continuum. And the point goes back and forth. Sometimes it's for more freedom, sometimes it's more equality, but you never win. And if anybody wins that war, so think of this as liberals and conservatives fighting this out. Now, what that means when you get right down to it in terms of our party politics, it is that Democrats, or liberals, let's say, and conservatives, or Republicans in our case, need each other. They are flip sides of the same coin. They're not separate things. They are essential to each other. As you fight these battles out in that arena, but as long as you keep the rules of the game, and once you suspend the rules, then you got a problem. So democracy is what we're trying to do, and I'll come back to this democracy initiative in just a moment. But democracy is a hard thing to do. You have to educate people beyond their self-interest. And that means you have to deal with the issue of pronouns. So when I say I and me and mine, I'm talking about the market. I'm talking about what I do as a consumer. When you and I say we and ours and us, now we're talking about what we do collectively. And collectively, we act through organizations. And the most important of those organizations is government. So we're all liberals and we're all conservatives. Depends on the issue. And years back, I had a sawmill in a previous life. The rest of it's not going to be my life story, but this is one thing that does go back a ways. I had a sawmill and had a good old boy, this is out in the hills of Arkansas, I had a good old boy come up to me and he was just dreadfully concerned because his son had come back home with an earring. And he was afraid the boy was gay. And it was interesting to watch the learning process because that was his son. And he loved that kid. And he was a great guy, a great father and so forth, a hard-working guy. He was salt of the earth, got a high school education, could fix anything. But he had to struggle with that, being gay, being a father of a gay. He had to learn to love and change his borders and thinking about things. But we're all, on some issues, we're liberal sometimes, and you get older like I am, and you change. I can remember when I was wild about some things, I'm less wild about them now. The point is to be less certain of our certainties and more stronger about our values, what we really count. But those aren't certainties. That's something different. So these are battles that we have. And two other comments in preface here. One of those is simply that we have never been as rich as we thought we were, or we told ourselves we were. So we went helter-skelter across the United States and we wrecked the Great Plains. Along comes the Dust Bowl. And about a third of the topsoil that once had existed in the Great Plains is gone, blown off or washed off, but it's gone. And there's a price for that, and the price is productivity on farmland. And so prices never, as our mutual friend Amory Lovins has put it so well, prices need to tell the truth about what we do and the cost of things in the world. We pay in Oberlin, before we are now a pretty much solar-powered or renewably powered community, but we were paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. You know where we're getting the coal? It was knocking mountaintops off in West Virginia and getting cheap coal and destroying communities and people's lives there and ecosystems. Most ancient mountains in the United States were that mountain range in the Appalachians. That coal wasn't 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour. If you got the prices that told the truth about that, that would be 40, 50, 60, or maybe just simply infinite. But we have been buying things in large amounts and paying prices that simply didn't tell the truth. And the last thing is this. Words matter. Numbers matter, but words matter. You get the words right, they will tell you which numbers you need to find. How many of you read 1984? How many of you are going to read 1984 again or for the first time? Everybody's hands goes up, right? 1984, George Orwell said so well that if you want to take over a country, you don't need tanks and so forth. I mean, that's one way to do it. But you corrupt the language so that words don't mean what they ought to mean. You follow what I'm saying? So one of the things that ails us as a society is we become liberals and conservatives and independents and so forth and people with all kinds of different backgrounds. We have to make sure that the words are right. The word freedom means something. And the word conservative means what it ought to mean, that we're conserving something of value. And liberal means what it ought to mean. It doesn't mean, whoopee. It means something about being open to change and so forth. But words matter, and this is why truth matters. If we can't get that right, God won't save us. Now, here we go. Gary Larson is one of my favorite cartoonists. Can all of you see that? Things have come up on us a whole lot faster than we thought they would. And Gary Larson depicts this so well. Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. I thought climate change was a real issue when we worked for Jimmy Carter in 1976. I thought it was an issue in 1995 when the third and fourth IPCC reports came out. Now we know it is a calamity. It's not something that is for future generations. This isn't how it's going to be. This is only how it is at the start. And Ann Wisson-Spurn is a friend of mine, and she's a landscape architect, got a degree studying with Ian McHarg at the University of Pennsylvania. Read this carefully, because the kind of thing that is happening here, and she describes it so well, it's a balance of opposites. It isn't people who are certain of their certainties. This is a time to live in a world and preserve it, sustain tradition and foster invention, promote freedom and cultivate order, forge identity and value difference, and so forth. That's the kind of complicated world. And if we don't begin to do that in colleges and universities, and one of the arguments for a liberal arts college is simply that this is the kind of thing that a liberal, a well-educated, liberally educated person does routinely. You know how complex the world is. So that's a start. So here's what I'm going to do in the next few minutes. I want to ask, is American democracy dying? And then if it is, so what? What's the problem? And then the last part is, what can we do about it? And why should we defend democracy? As we got into this democracy initiative, I'll tell you this. It is harder to give a coherent answer to that question than I thought it would be. It isn't an easy question. Why do we want democracy? Why not just turn it over to an elite? You know, Plato had his guardians and people who are really, really smart, and what's called an epistocracy, or all these experts. But then you stop and think about expertise. You know, those experts that got us into the Vietnam War, got us into Iraq, collapsed the banks. These were experts. And in the 2008 banking crisis, these were people who invented these, quote, instruments, financial instruments. No one knew what they did, last of all, the people who invented them. So here we go. Is democracy dying? The public press says yes, it is. The people who study democracy for a living, the political science community, by and large, think we are in serious trouble. And it didn't start with Trump. This predated Trump. He happens to be the person that turned the heat on the boiler, or on the burner, up way high, but it didn't start with Trump. And it didn't start with Republicans. We have been, if you compare this to maintenance of a property, we've deferred a lot of the maintenance on this thing, this house we call democracy. So there's been a flood of books. If you go to the website, our website goes live in October, but there are a flood of really good books. And one of the things you've got to credit Donald Trump with, he has sparked an incredible renaissance of great thinking about democracy. And I'm not joking about that. There is a long shelf of books. My wife complains about it because there are books about democracy everywhere. They're in the bathroom, they're in the couch, they're in the bed. She can't turn around without finding books. And so, is the U.S. a democracy? The empirical evidence says no, we're not. And yeah, I'm going to get on that slide and read it, but you can begin to get down the particulars there in orange. And then Ben Page and Martin Gilens, who have been probably the most prominent empirical political scientists studying this issue, concluded it's clear that the average citizen exerts little or no influence on federal government policy. Now, when you think about this, say, like the Grand Canyon, public opinion is here, public policy is here, and there's this Grand Canyon in between. The bridge that ought to connect what you and I as citizens want to have happen in the world ought to connect that. So there's almost a one-to-one relationship with what we want and what we get, the policies and regulations and laws and so forth. That ought to happen. But that bridge has either been broken or it's been turned into a toll bridge. So your opinions and mine, for the most part, don't matter. What does matter is what people on K Street want, the lobbyists in the industry and so forth. The economists put it this way: we are now a flawed democracy and sinking. Freedom House, that maintains a separate database, the largest database on such issues, says roughly the same thing. We're now a flawed democracy. And there are a whole set of very complicated indicators: freedom of press, and attacks on the press, and laws and so forth, and voting suppression and so forth. Then if you ask people, is it important to live in a democracy? The answer comes back more and more no, or less than it used to be. And so this comes from the World Values Survey, and these are 5 different countries that were polled, or have been part of 6 different countries that have been polled. But the same holds in virtually every country that we once thought was a democracy. And you find that the World War II generation, in our case, roughly my generation or older, are more attuned to democracy. They understand what it was because they had to go fight for it. They lived through a depression. They saw democracy somehow deal with those issues. They saw it fight fascism, communism, and so forth. They're still pretty solid supporters of it. But the generation typical, and this goes back, I mean, you can read Plato and Aristotle and all the ancient people that wrote about democracy, we forget. Generations go by and we forget what it was about. We forget what was going on. Oh, and by the way, back on that slide just a second. It doesn't really matter if you're wealthy. Some of the lowest scores on democracy occur among billionaires in Silicon Valley. So it's not a matter of this is rich versus poor. Some of the wealthiest people in the United States are saying in response to questions, is it important to live in a democracy? Well, not really. And some are outright hostile to it. And there is a group, we can talk about this later in Q&A if you want to discuss this, there is a group that would rather that we run the world by algorithms than by voting. And that is not a joke. That is their intention of a world, to create a world run essentially by smarter algorithms, because we're just too stupid, we're too flawed. And all the arguments about our flaws and the fads that we get suckered into and so forth, I mean, we are collectively fast thinkers, but we're slow learners. And that shows up in thinking about democracy. Okay. Now, why? And there are a lot of reasons. I can't go, this is a much longer and bigger topic than we have time for tonight. But one of the reasons is simply economic. And this is data, if you look at this is by decade cohorts. If you come over here in 1940, in 1950, 1960, if you were born in 1940, you had a pretty good chance of getting roughly the same or better income than your parents. But then it declines by every 10 years. It declines. And so if you're a college student here, your chances of living as well as your parents, whatever they made, are not nearly as good as theirs were living as well as their parents, or better. I grew up near 17 miles from Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown Sheet and Tube was one of the major manufacturers. There were Youngstown Sheet and Tube and U.S. Steel. They both didn't go bankrupt. They were still making money, but they were disinvested in. So Youngstown Sheet and Tube was basically a cash cow that was allowed to disintegrate. It was bought by a company that then sold it, put it out of business, and moved the money to the condo market in Colorado. So Youngstown was disinvested. But in 1940, Youngstown was the wealthiest city per capita in the United States. Youngstown, Ohio. And if you go to Youngstown, Ohio now, it looks like it was bombed out and burned out in World War II. It's a city that's disappeared. It is in ruins. And you want to weep as you go through these old mansions. That was the wealthiest neighborhood in Ohio, and probably the United States, was part of that wealthy neighborhood on the hill above Youngstown, Ohio. That was big money, gone. How do we compare on any number of things? You know the story about as well as I do. We used to be, when I graduated from college a million years ago, we used to be number one in virtually everything. That was after World War II. The U.S. economy was booming. We were a big chunk of the global economy. I mean, the world went our way. But we didn't keep pace. We didn't know how to adapt to that, and that's another different story. I'm from Ohio, and this is a chart done by the Joint Economic Committee, released by the U.S. Senate about 3 weeks ago. So what they call deaths of despair here, these are suicide, drugs, alcohol-related, opioid addiction, and so forth. More people are dying. Our birth rate, or our life expectancy, is going down among older white males, unemployed, that feel unimportant, and they're angry, and they're drinking, and they're on opioids, and so forth. But the same thing is happening by and large to younger people, again, mostly males, mostly white, that are on opioid addiction. So I can take you around Ohio, where something like 30 people every day or every week, whatever the number is, it's a large number, are dying because of opioid addiction. And it isn't just opioids. It's depression. It's the feeling that there's simply no hope for them. Now, we have to get down into the weeds here on this, and I don't want to do much on this, but here's an issue. We've struggled with what capitalism is. And we went through 2 world wars, we fought communism, and we didn't much like socialism, and so forth and so on. So whatever the ism was, we had to deal with what this thing is. What you're looking at are 2 people who polarize, and probably, I doubt many of you have read these books or follow this kind of dialogue. It does get esoteric, but it's really, really, really important. So if you look at the Frederick Hayek is the guy here on the left, Milton Friedman is on the right. I'm sorry, Carl Polanyi is this guy. This is Milton Friedman, the University of Chicago economist. And what they did, and this again is not one of those things where you can be all that certain of your certainties. You have to say there's a little bit of both is right in this. But we're trying to forge what does it mean to earn our keep in a way that's just and fair and prosperous and so forth. And then doesn't leave this residue of disaster for your generation if you're a student here. And they signed off very different ways. Carl Polanyi, this book, The Great Transformation, he wrote it while I was living in Vermont. Came out in 1944. And what it is an argument that if you make an economy that only functions by markets, you'll have disaster. The glue that holds people together comes undone. And his argument is probably in most ways right. Markets don't exist. You and I, the society, creates the conditions and the rules that govern markets. You follow what I'm saying? There is no free market. We create the rules and laws that make it. If you have a free market, you're going to have a free-for-all. That's that football game with Uzis and hand grenades. So Milton Friedman and the neoliberal, what was called the Mount Pelerin Society, came and began to articulate a very different view. Keep government out of this. Now, this goes back to an older view of liberalism. That goes into some history we don't need to get into. But what they did was to say that the market ought to be left alone, as much as you can possibly leave a market alone. We want their subsidies, we want their R&D, so forth, but we want to leave it alone. So we have these two positions. One is markets need to be regulated, and it's government. It's that I, me, mine, ours, us, we, that dichotomy again. So that battle was fought out. And it was fought out, unfortunately, most behind closed doors and in academic journals that you and I don't read much. But it was influential, and it shifted the ground in which we live economically. And it was an argument terribly portentous. This was important stuff. But it was an argument that it went right over our heads. It wasn't in the newspapers much. You didn't see this, but it showed up because in our public life, this got funded by different kinds of organizations. So I've already said that, I'll skip over that, but here's one of the results of this. And I don't want to dwell on it. This is not an argument against capitalism, okay? Am I clear on that? This is an argument only for a discussion that helps us think through what kind of economy is it we want and we can live with and doesn't destroy the planet, all right? It's an economy that would have said we have to pay the prices that tell the truth. So if you're buying stuff that's changing the climate, that ought to show up in the price tag at the checkout counter. You follow what I'm saying? This is important stuff. So here's what's going on. The income distribution of the very well, this is no news to anybody in the room. So this is what's happened. The wealthy have gotten a lot wealthier, and then per capita income's down here. If you require or if you live on wages, your wages are roughly the same in constant dollars that they were in 1973. You have not progressed at all. Part of this is a result of taxes. So if you look at the tax breaks, this is the top 20%, and these are done by, further up you go, the wealthier you are. So that's what happens in terms of the taxes in the country. So there are certain reasons why things happen. They're esoteric. You read them on the back pages of the financial news and so forth. Some you don't read about much at all. But the fact is, and nobody disputes this, there has been an income gap that has grown. We are roughly now, the United States is roughly at the income distribution level we were at in 1929 at the point of the Great Depression. That's where we are. And you can't sweep that under a rug. That's simply, now that's not an argument against capitalism, but that is an argument that it's time to begin to talk about how wealth is distributed and who gets what, when, and how. Let me give you one for instance. How many of you have smartphones? How many of you have smartphones? You all have smartphones. You have computers. You know what? Most of that technology, a big chunk of it in a smartphone and a computer, was developed by what? Money from you and me. That was federal R&D money. Have you ever gotten a check back from the government for what we invested in those things? No. Nobody here has gotten a nickel back. Because what Apple did and Amazon and all these tech companies was to develop technologies that we helped to pay the R&D on because they were too risky. You follow? We've never gotten a check back. Well, it's time that if we put the GUI interface and so forth, it's time that we get some of that back. That's a return on investment. We bet on those things. I'll skip over that. That quote's too well known to require much. If you haven't read Jane Mayer, Democracy or the Dark Money, it's worth a read. It's in paperback now. And Zephyr, teach out Corruption in America. This is we never get rid of corruption entirely, but again, it's one of those things that we collectively decide what kind of society we want to live in. Now, here's part of the issue, and I don't mean to belabor this, but there has been an old strain in American political thinking that goes all the way back to the founding of the Constitution. The anti-federalists wanted small government and wanted lots of states' rights, not the least because it was tied up with race. And they were afraid that if you didn't have state control, slavery would be abolished. Slaves were the source of the majority of wealth in the United States. At the time of the Civil War, that was the biggest chunk of wealth in the country. Mississippi had more millionaires per capita than any other. Mississippi than any other state in the Union at that time. So there has been this long dispute about the role of government. And it shows up again in the nullification crisis under President Jackson. It shows up in the New Deal debates. And it showed up again in the election of Ronald Reagan, who said very famously, government's the problem. You get it off our back. You follow? Now, some of you are too young to remember this. But that started a 40-year, let's just call it a half-century, renewed war against we, us, and ours. That's not an argument for socialism. That's not an argument for communism. That's just an argument for some kind of democratically run society. So on the screen, I put this in different colors for a different purpose, but this is what governments do that markets cannot do or will not do. That's why you have government. And yet we understand that when it comes to war and security. We don't understand it when it comes to securities and finances and so forth, or city building and those kinds of things. And so this war against what we collectively can do has gone on for a half century, but actually it's an old war. It goes way back in American history. Keep government very small. But there were always reasons to keep it small. The people who benefited wanted a small government that didn't meddle in their business much. So this gets very political. What should we meddle in? What should we leave alone? But my point is not to say one or the other. The point simply is we need to talk. It's time to have a national conversation that gets past Donald Trump and Republicans versus Democrats and so forth. Let's begin to talk about what kind of society we want. Now, the clock is ticking. Climate change means that we've got very limited time to resolve some very big issues about how we conduct our public business. Now, people say, well, geez, I'm just not political. You can't be non-political. By being non-political, you're just saying, well, I like the status quo and I'm going to stay in the bleachers. You can't be non-political. Had a college dean once tell me, he said that David Oberlin is a college, not a cause. I said back, I said, you can't be a college without a cause. If you say we have no cause, your cause is the status quo, and much of the same holds true with politics. Abraham Lincoln, same thing. Lincoln came out of the Whig tradition in Western life in Britain and the United States, and Lincoln was a guy that started land-grant universities and railroad grants and so forth. He was an active president saying, here's what we have to do so that we can be prosperous, and it's got to be shared prosperity. He came out of a log cabin, as you recall. And in James Madison, this is a quote I want you to remember. If men were angels, which we're not, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. We aren't angels. And so whether you're a Democrat, Democrats are not angels, Republicans aren't angels. That's why Madison, in that famous Federalist paper, said you put them together, checks and balances. You check ambition against ambition, but you let them fight it out. You keep the Uzis and hand grenades off the football field. You let the game go on, given the rules. Do you follow what I'm saying? So, given the fact that we're limited people, there's nobody that could really run this. And I'm going to come back to that point in just a minute, in a different way. Our political dialogue has progressively moved to the right. And this is not Orr's opinion. This simply is the way this works out empirically. Nancy McLean's book, Democracy and Change, by the way, is really a brilliant piece of work on some of the thinking that went into this. But our dialogue has gone further and further to the right. So on the right, if you are, quote, a conservative, you're no longer a conservative. You passed that point a long time ago. You faded into libertarianism or some other ism, but you passed the point of conservatism. I grew up in a conservative Republican home. It was Dwight Eisenhower conservatism. That was the 1950s. And there were certain rules you accepted. If you were a conservative Republican, there were certain things you did, and the same with Democrats. But our dialogue, Democrats have statistically stayed about where they've always been. When you do the poll data and run the numbers, they're about where they've always been. Whether you like it or not, that's not an argument for that. Republicans have been the party that's moved the most. So two of the sharpest analysts of American politics are Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson. Paul Pearson's an Oberlin alum. But here is how they put it in one of the most brilliant books on American politics written. They've written 4 like this. And if you want to get into understanding American politics, you start with Hacker and Pearson. But this describes a movement of a party. Then you have to ask, why did it go to the right? What was going on within the Republican section? And I'm going to leave that just that question hanging. Here's the result. we become a divided country. Now, the red counties depicted here aren't 100% to zero. These are 48 to 52, 47, 53. So it's not quite as bad as you would think. But the blue, these little enclaves of Democratic votes, or quote liberals, or whatever you want to call it, they get smaller and smaller. And the fact is, we've herded liberals into cities. So when kids graduated from Oberlin College, and maybe the same may be true here at Catawba, but they tend to congregate in places like San Francisco, where I've got a son living and two granddaughters, or Denver, or Dallas, or Atlanta, but they tend to go to cities. Now, the problem is this. When you begin to think about how this works out for democracy, by 2040, half of us will live in 8 states. Now, what that means, given the way the Constitution works, is that 30% of the public will choose 70% of the Senate. Think about that. That's not far out. That's 2040. So we've got a situation where we are structurally hamstrung. We can't move the country as long as this is not a representative democracy. So if you're say an urban voter in Montana or Colorado or any state, you don't have the same clout as the rural voter. Rural votes count for more in the election to the Senate. This is my electoral district, and that's Jim Jordan, who's the farthest to the right in our county. Doesn't believe in climate change and so forth and so on. That's him right there. His email address is, to keep Jim Jordan in office, this is what they have to do. So we're this liberal bastion right there, but to keep him there, now, the art of gerrymandering, if you follow the gerrymandering discussion, the art of gerrymandering got really good. If you want to create an electoral district and elect all, short, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, left-handed Lithuanians, you can do it. You just enter those into the computer code. You can get whatever district you want. But when you do that, when you either pack or stack districts, you are impairing our voting right to vote in electoral districts that are fairly drawn. You follow what I'm saying? And you in North Carolina know more about this than the other state in the union right now. But Democrats do it when they're in office, and so the case that went before the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court dodged included one state, Democratic state, Maryland, and one state, Republican. It was North Carolina. Now, take a look at this. This is for state houses. So in Ohio, my state, we are slightly, in the last election, 2018, 51% Republican, 48% Democrat. But Republicans have 62% of the legislature, and Democrats have 38%. That's gerrymandering. And the importance of this is that the polls, or not the polls, the census that's done every 10 years allocates representatives. And so the state districts are redrawn. And that's why local politics really do matter. Here in North Carolina, you got 51% given 46%, 48 given 54%. Those differences matter because those differences are how those electoral districts are drawn. Now, I'm going to finish out this part of the talk. We have another problem, that's simply corporations. By these 3 decisions, and you need to know all these and what they meant, the 1886 Santa Clara County decision was a matter of no importance at all, totally unimportant. But it was about unpaid railroad taxes, and it ended up in the Supreme Court. And the important part of this case was that the secretary to the court was a railroad attorney. And the railroad attorney wrote the head notes to the decision, and in the head notes he said that the Supreme Court had decided that the court believes that, or decided that corporations were legal persons. Now, you and I are legal persons. We're mortal, we die, we have limited assets, we can only be in one place at one time, and so forth. That's to be a person. Corporations can be global, and they never die. They're just assets, piles of money that move from thing to thing. So by saying that corporations were persons under the terms of the 14th Amendment. Now, remember the 14th Amendment? That was one of the 3 Civil War amendments. And it gave due process and protected the citizenship and the right to vote of persons of previous servitude. But it got hijacked. The corporations, in this case, the railroad corporations, hijacked it. And so all of a sudden you have these things called corporations that are protected theoretically like you and I. That means you have freedom of speech, but they do too. You can lie, they can lie. But the assets aren't equal. Now, the second decision compounds the error. Buckley Vallejo said that the expenditure of corporate money in elections was a form of free speech. Now, the logic of that defies anything I understand logic to be about. But the expenditure of money, so your assets for the most part are limited. Corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money and it's free speech. The last one, Citizens United, is simply opened up the door for money to be spent that was not going to be counted in elections. And then there's this little problem. We don't know exactly what this is all about, but this is simply the record. Russian interference, and this is part of Russian military doctrine officially now. This is not something that is far-fetched. They put it in journals that their penetration of their, quote, enemies will be first electronic. They will destabilize societies, then do whatever they're going to do. We don't know that. But this is how it's gone. And it is extensive. Robert Mueller in the Mueller report made a big issue of this. This is not trivial. This is an attack. Now, the problem we have with the Mueller report is nothing in your life or my life really changed. You came home from work and you turned on the TV, you did whatever you do, you play golf or whatever, and nothing changed. After Pearl Harbor, we could see the problem. The Japanese attack, they sunk our boats, and you could see it. There was smoke and dead bodies and so forth. But the Mueller report, no. It was just, whatever. So let me get down to the heart of the matter. So what? If democracy is dying and there are lots of causes out there, the question comes back to us, so what? And let me put these two quotes up there. Shoshana Zuboff writes this in a brilliant book called Surveillance Capitalism. And it is a brilliant analysis of the world we're now living in with Amazon and Google and Facebook and so forth. It's just it's the best thing I've ever read on that subject. It happens to be a 510-page book or some such. But the one idea to emerge from the long story of human oppression is it insists upon a people's inalienable right to rule themselves. Now here, you take a deep breath. Think about what that means. It means you matter as a person. You have rights. They are, in the phrase of Thomas Jefferson, unalienable or inalienable. They are permanent rights. As a person, your body cannot be violated without defending your rights. Neither can your mind. Neither can your circumstances. So we have these rights to human dignity. And then C.S. Lewis, who's a great writer, the medieval literature specialist and then the Christian writer, the real reason for democracy, he writes, is that mankind is so fallen that no man can be trusted with unchecked power over his fellows. No men are fit to be masters. He said for his own self, he wasn't fit to rule over a hen house. That's one argument. And that gets into political theory. Why do we have rights? And what do those rights mean for the way we live? And can we defend those rights? And that's the whole point of citizenship and so forth and all that. Here's the second problem. This is Jim Hansen, who is the most brilliant and best known, and for good reasons, climate scientist in the world. This guy was predicting climate change back in the 80s. It's very hard to see us fixing the climate until we fix our democracy. And you go back to this issue. Gus Speth said that climate change is the most massive failure of government in history. We knew enough to act. People are going to die because we didn't act. People will die. Greta Thunberg said this very poignantly 2 days ago. But people die. There are real consequences for the failure to act. But we knew enough to act. We didn't do it. And then the headlines are going to look like this. More and more, the papers are full of this, and it's heating up. It's faster, coming at us faster than we thought. But here's what's going on in Washington, D.C. We are dismantling the even limited capacity that we had to act. We are tearing it apart. It's like having a fire department and we're letting the air out of the tires and taking the hoses off and selling the ladders and so forth. We are dismantling the capacity that we have to forestall what is clearly going to be a catastrophe. And then here is the Keeling curve. I want to point out a couple things here. This simply, again, is David Keeling went to Mauna Loa in 1958 and began to measure CO2 in the atmosphere. At that time, it measured 315 parts per million. Now, all of you know this for the most part, I expect. But if you run this curve back It never goes above about 280 or 290 parts per million. We know for a hard fact for about 800,000 years. If you loosen the standards for evidence a little bit and use inferential data, you can take it way back further than that. But now it started, and this is from the combustion of fossil fuels and other methane and so forth. It's going up. So it's been averaging in the last couple of years. Last year, I think it was 2.2 parts per million up. And so the problem we have is that I've said this to the audience, I think I probably said this here a long time ago too, but it's the way we perceive things. If I reach down here and I pull out a double-barrel shotgun and I start walking slowly toward the audience with kind of a wild look on my face, what I trigger is your fight-flight mechanism. We were honed for real threats. So if it was a grizzly bear, we were good. If it had big sharp teeth, we were great. But that chart doesn't do it. That's just simply colors, pixels on a screen. It doesn't hit us where you have to think through to understand that is a threat. And the other thing is that this is 15 years, whatever the level of CO2 in the atmosphere is now, it's not what's causing the problems at this point. The problem is that we're seeing the effects of what we did 15 or 20 years ago. There's a lag between what comes out of our smokestacks and tailpipes and the climate change-driven effects that we see in terms of weather. And then I'm going to just make this point very plainly. Carbon stays in the atmosphere for a long time. And so it weathers out slowly. So the airplane I took today, roughly maybe 20% of the carbon released by that airplane will still be in the atmosphere 1,000 years from now. This isn't like a solvable thing in the way you fix a broken carburetor on a Chevy pickup truck. And then this again goes back to that second slide. Things are closer than they appear. This is global temperature. There are now 7.4 billion of us on the planet, all living fossil fuel powered lives, some much more so than others. And that's where we are. And that circle, 1.5C circle, says that was set at the 2015 COP conference as the safety boundary. And I don't think 1.5 is safe either. But rather than 2 degrees centigrade, not Fahrenheit, but centigrade warming is now thought to be no longer safe. And then you see things like this, the melting of the Arctic and Greenland and so forth. And then these are pictures you see every night in the news. These are just the current pictures. And then the problem of refugees and immigrants. This is a problem that's going to get worse. And there are going to be people in this room that will be climate refugees. There'll be 250 million climate refugees, according to the UN, by the middle of the century. So the problem we have in the Mexican border is just the start. This is not how it is. It's how it is only at the beginning. So we're going to see a lot more of that. This is the heat blob in the Pacific that's come up on the Canadian coast. The words on this are particularly important. We have to understand what is at stake here is cascading systemic failures. So it isn't you got a problem over here and a problem over here. It is these problems coming together like a cascade or an avalanche of failures. One pebble hits another pebble, hits 3 more, hits 8 more, and so forth. The last thing I want to put out is this. Why democracy? I think it is possible, not only possible, it's likely that we could be developing a solar-powered, hyper-efficient, resilient, sustainable fascist society. I don't even think that's a far stretch. I think that is a likely outcome. And by fascist society, read the words at the bottom. Is there anything in those words at the bottom that aren't on the headlines in any given week in our papers? That's our direction. Why democracy? Because there is a lot of, and a fascist society won't solve the problem of your dignity. It'll, to the contrary. It won't solve the problem of climate because it has economic interests that are benefiting by climate change. This is the Nuremberg rally grounds in Germany. This is the party rally in 1934. That's Adolf Hitler. That's what it looks like now. I went there several years ago with my wife, and it looks like that. They've taken down the pillars that were back here. This is where Leni Riefenstahl filmed this because they were falling over. That's where Adolf Hitler stood. That's his podium right there. And I swear if you got real quiet, you could hear the cheers of those people about to be fed into the slaughterhouse we call World War II. That was fascism. Could we, and then you have to understand why, how did the society of Goethe and Schopenhauer and great philosophers and Kant, how did that society end up as a fascist society that butchered, industrially butchered 6.5 million Jews? 65 million people died in World War II. And in some ways, it's still not over. Could it happen here? I don't know. These are the hate groups charted by some organizations. They're all around. We got them in Ohio. And then the last slide in this, I want to put this out. Victor Klemperer was a German writer who survived World War II. He was a Jewish writer, philologist, studied language for a living. He survived because his wife was a Gentile. And he wrote 2 books on his experience of World War II. This is the book he wrote in the 1950s on language. And he has this scene where he runs into this guy who was a friend of his before the war. And the war's over. I mean, Germany's been destroyed. Hitler probably by that time was dead. And he runs into him, and the guy says, I believed in him, Hitler, but I still believe in him, capital H-I-M. I really do. We have to understand as we begin to construct a decent and rational public life, we have to understand that we are fundamentally at some level irrational. That's the old reptilian brain. We have to understand that we're not just rational, but we are damn good rationalizers. And so we have to understand how we think. This is not an aberration. These were people that were the pinnacle of civilization in many ways for the 2 centuries before. So what do you do? What do you do here? Let me tell you, and I'm going to wrap this up real quickly. What we started in Oberlin, these things are so massive, if you feel like I do, they're just too big. So to get a deal or get a handle on this, we started what we call the Oberlin Project. It was an attempt to make the city carbon neutral, build a local economy, make it prosperous, rebuild. We were a Rust Belt, so you had to rebuild a good bit of the downtown economy. So we set out to do that. Everything on the list here we did, except for the very last item was still in motion. But we began to pull together a community around the word sustainability. Now, this isn't like passing a bond issue. This is like where you get people hyped up and you pass an issue and it's over. We need to be a constituency for the long haul. That means staying with these issues, understanding enough about why they're important. But this is democracy at the local level. This is, John mentioned the Lewis Center. This is the building, entirely solar powered. It was the first entirely solar powered building, I think, on a U.S. college campus. It's also zero discharge. It gave us a model in a 14,200 square foot building of what that looks like. Not a perfect building, not as pretty in a lot of ways as this building here, but it was one, and John's building here, your building here, and this building and some others began to gave concrete demonstration that we could begin to do things. And the beauty of architecture and buildings is we're visual creatures. Are most 80% of our sensory apparatus is connected to our eyes. So if you see it, it's a lot more important. So what we're trying to do is to make this the normal sort of thing. That was the PV array 11-acre array that we put in 5 years ago. This is an entirely solar-powered hotel we finished 3 years ago. The point of this is this. These are just buildings. The point of this is to begin to get us to think through what we do as educated people. You at Catawba, me at Oberlin, people at Harvard or Wichita State University, or wherever and whatever. We are the educated. And to be educated is to be good with language for one thing, and use language to good purposes and to think through. These words need to be redefined. They have been perverted in the past 40 years. Nobody's fault in particular. I blame a lot of this on advertising and the commercialization of media. But we need to protect that. This is the words that we say we, ours, and us. So we started this. And the idea that a little dinky college town right in the middle of the Rust Belt could have something to say was kind of beggars imagination. We started the State of American Democracy. The first event, this is Tim Egan from the New York Times, the first event was held in November of 2017. I was appalled by the outcome of the election. And I'm probably more conservative than most of the people in Oberlin, but I was appalled that we could elect that man with that preparation and those known characteristics. So that's just my personal politics. There they are. But the rule of this is, the point of this is to begin to reestablish the rules by which we protect that public dialogue. So Tim Egan was there, and we had a bunch of speakers. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger on the... by the way, we had a 250-pound glass podium right in front of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it blocked his vision to the right side of the room. And so he said, he reached up with one hand and laid it down. This was 250 pounds. And he told the people on the right side of the room if they didn't like that, he would terminate them. That's Tom Steyer on the right. This is one of the high spots in that opening dialogue. This is Bill Ritter on the left and Pete Wehner on the right. Bill Ritter, liberal Democratic governor from Colorado, former governor. Pete Wehner, had been in the Bush administration, fundamentalist Christian, right wing. People said later, this is one of the high spots. We asked them to talk about your political views and how you would reconstitute those views given what you know now. And you know what they did? They talked civilly. They talked civically. They were interesting. They were entertaining. They talked through their issues and differences. And they could have gone for another 2 hours. People said later when they evaluated this, that was the highlight of the whole thing. They had 32 headline people in 3 days. This was the highlight of it because they saw two people at either end of the spectrum talking sensibly about their differences. They weren't right, they weren't wrong, but they were talking. That was Reverend William Barber. He was like an exclamation mark at the end of it, as you all know here. Here's what we're doing now. This is the close of the talk. We started this, that was the opening of it. Here are the things that we're assuming. This isn't a left or right issue. This isn't about Donald Trump. This is about the long roots. A lot of the deferred maintenance in American democracy goes back to the Constitution and before. It goes back to 1619 and slavery and lots of mistakes that we made along the way, lots of things that we didn't do right. And then here's what I think we have to do. We have to get from anger to constructive change, but it's got to be an honest dialogue. We've got to go from being mad at each other to being able to be talking to each other. Pete Wehner and Bill Ritter. We've got to go from symptoms of problems to the causes, the bedroot causes. A lot of those are the way we run the economy. Some of those are the way we think. Short-term to long-term systemic changes, not patches. We've got to begin to see the whole system instead of putting patches on these things that are serious problems. So the book, John mentioned, the book comes out in February of 2020. These are some of the writers in the book. We have 30-some writers in it. It'll come out in paperback and so forth. And then we're following the book publication with events across the country, 14 that we're officially sponsoring, another roughly 14 or 15 that will occur as kind of adjunct events on college campuses and various professional meetings. The opening event will be at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. on the spiritual foundations of democracy. I want to brand this, we want to brand this as essentially a moral issue first and foremost. This is how we treat each other. We treat each other through tax laws, through regulations and laws and so forth. We treat all kinds of ways. But this is a moral issue. So the opening event will be on Spiritual Foundations of Democracy, National Cathedral, main nave event, 2,200 people. Celebrity heavy. One of the next events is going to be up in Boston at the New England Aquarium, which sits right smack on the harbor. So the water level is rising. And the auditorium looks out on the harbor. They're in the crosshairs of change. And so that event is on climate change, democracy, and urban planning. And the point there is to begin to help Bostonians develop a constituency to support what the Green Ribbon Commission in Boston is doing in terms of public policy and so forth. So we're saying to each one of these 14 and the others as well, what's the problem you've got to solve? What's the problem you're facing, and how can we help think through public engagement in that issue? We want to start a big conversation. Now, final couple slides. Power doesn't go away. You wish it would. You wish we were rational enough and had good enough goodwill to simply act through our problems. We can't do that. So this has John Lewis in the foreground getting his head fractured, skull fractured, but this is what's going on. And for those of you who are students, that's Greta Thunberg at the very start. That's when she's 13, and she has kicked up a Donnybrook. Whether you like it or dislike it, she has kicked up a Donnybrook. She was not willing to say, I've got to wait until I'm 35 and settled in my career before I can act. She did it at 13. And that's what we need to do. I love this. That is a certain degree of fierceness. You saw that on television the other day too. But this is the way these things are all happening. This is a Juliana lawsuit that is arguing that the young people should have standing in cases of climate change and so forth. Pope Francis, Native peoples. Now, what do? Here's my list. Get involved. Read everything you can. The literature, quite literally, literature on democracy is terrific. Connect, run for office, write your representative, organize, join the fight, write op-eds, whatever, and a million other things. You've got talents, we need it now. But if you're younger, don't wait until you're, say 35 or 50 at the edge of your first heart attack before you say, I'm secure enough, I'm now a full professor here at Catawba College, I can now do something that I've always wanted to do, change the world. We need you now. And that's why the youth movement right now is so critically important in this conversation about democracy, because this is your future, and we're casting a long shadow on that future. And then here's left and right. Thomas Jefferson was one of the great people of the left, liberty and get government off your back and the smallest government possible. Edmund Burke was a conservative. And you look at those two quotes. Those converge. Nobody has the right to mess with somebody else's future, period. And so when Jefferson said, hey, the dead, they're dead. They have no right to rule over us. But that carbon in the atmosphere, that rules over them. That you people who are younger, that carbon in the atmosphere is a form of tyranny. And it's going to rule your life in more ways than we can count. But the same with Edmund Burke. We're just trustees, midway between a distant past and a far-flung future. We're trustees, and our job is to pass on this entailed inheritance of laws, customs, religion, and so forth to the future. And then again, Ann Spirn's comment. These issues are complicated. We need colleges and universities to step up and help young people think, not as ideologues, not certain of their certainties, but think through all of the complexities that have to do with equality and freedom and all of these things. Think through as intelligent, liberally educated people committed to a decent, livable future. And then there's this issue. Time's short. Martin Luther King, this is particularly important to me because Martin Luther King gave the precursor of that talk at Oberlin as a commencement talk in 1965. This was said spoken in the Fierce Urgency of Now speech in 1967. He was shot a year later. We don't have much time, so there's urgency here. We have to act. The question is, how do we act intelligently, compassionately, decisively, to good effect for future generations? Well, it's like Winston Churchill's statement in World War II of saying we have to do things now that the future generations will look back and say, hey, that was their finest hour, or that was our finest hour. We're in the same situation. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for a few questions, and anybody? Samantha?
I probably don't need a microphone.
Yeah.
By the way, this is on the screen. That is one view of theology that may be necessary.
I'm curious to know where the balance lies in, we're in a situation now where we have such a divide in wealth, and as to your point, many of the 1%ers would probably prefer to rid themselves of democracy because it keeps them in control of the wealth. There's cronyism, there's all of these other factors, and you're talking about a massive global social political wake-up call, but in America, at least right now, you have people so desperate to just get food on the table. They're so entrenched in the problems of their own day-to-day lives. How do you put this at the forefront when somebody's so worried about feeding their children?
Sure.
But, I mean, how do we not get into the situation where we are literally sitting on the boiling pot before we go, oh, there's a bigger problem? How do you have a wake up to consciousness?
Well, that's a great question. There's some people that cannot act. There's some people that can act decisively and helpfully. There's some people who need to act by thinking through things. There's some people who need to act by organizing community gardens. This is kind of, they say, all hands on deck time. So whatever you can do, you've got to do. But no society should let people fall through the cracks. Nobody ought to go hungry. Nobody. No kid should be worried about food or safety or security. Nobody. That's a lousy society. And it gets you real quickly into the violence that pervades society, because a good bit of this goes back to violence. And I stand four square that every person, I mean, I'm a Second Amendment person in this way. If you take out the militia clause and so forth, if you neuterize the Second Amendment, then fine, let's have, everybody has a right to a weapon. But they understood, the writers of the Second Amendment, a weapon was what? It was a 6-foot-long, single-shot musket. And I stand four square to everybody, if you want it, gets a 6-foot single-shot musket and 3 musket balls, no more. No AR-15s. I mean, you don't put weapons out there that were only used to kill people. How insane can that be? And it takes, after a killing in Parkland and other places, you finally people wake up. That is simply, that's not, you don't have a right to own that. Magically, in your own mind, bring back the writers of the Bill of Rights. Bring it back and put it before them and show them the bodies of kids killed by weapons only designed to kill people. And even if you read, the Second Amendment, until the Heller case, the Second Amendment was all about the right to have a weapon for hunting and so forth. But anyway, this is a societal problem. And it can't be solved by you and me sitting there. Individual, charity can help a bit. But we've got to create a better society that nobody goes to bed hungry at night. Nobody should be worried about their security as a kid. And, we can do a better job than that. And we have done in the past. We've done that.
Okay, got one over here. Yep.
There were several mentions of solar power in the speech, but I didn't catch anything about wind. I don't understand.
Wasn't I windy enough? Is it?
No, I'm referring to windmills.
Well, we are in Ohio, and the point of wind, I could add another 15 minutes to the talk. Wind power, if you raise the hub height to an average around 320 feet above ground, virtually every place in the United States can commercially exploit wind. So it's part of that mix. Here's what I want to say about that. However, instead of singling out nuclear or wind or whatever, our mutual friend Amory Lovins has been the best advocate for a systems view. Put it all on the table. Let's have a conversation about energy that includes efficiency and design and wind and solar and so on. Let's begin to talk about all of them together. If you isolate them and silo wind or nuclear or whatever, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. But I mean, your point is a good point. There are lots of ways that we could make the transition. The question is how to speed it up in time, because again, time for us is really short. And when I drive past malls that are lit up like Christmas trees at 2 o'clock in the morning, why are we doing that? I mean, the wastage in the society. Again, Amory, I don't mean to overquote on Amory, but he's done some of the most valuable work on efficiency. And I'm going to get the percentage wrong, but I think I've heard him say that if existing technology, you could probably eliminate 80% of our existing energy use at no net cost, and probably at a huge savings. And if that's half wrong, you could still eliminate about half of it. And so you begin to think about, let's say a refrigerator, 50 years ago or 20 years ago, you bought a refrigerator that was a machine that used 1,750 kilowatt hours a year. State of the art now is around 200. Or a light bulb, 100 watts down to a compact fluorescent, down to an LED. You go from 100 to 4. And so there are all these kind of things. So if you want to have a rational energy policy, the first step would be to take, like a wet dish rag, squeeze all the waste out of it, get it out, and then figure out from the rest of that. But we did, the 2 buildings I showed here that we did at Oberlin. The Lewis Center opened, it's 14,200 square feet. It opened in the year 2000, entirely solar powered, and generates a surplus of 40% or more every year. And I'm in a state, Oberlin's in a state where sunshine is a theory. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've heard about it. But the hotel is built 105,000 square feet, entirely solar powered, platinum rated. So you can do these things. I mean, it's not the technology problem, it's the political will to do it. Anyway, thanks for that point.
Okay. Please use a microphone if you would.
I am absolutely afraid of what just happened in Saudi Arabia. A few cruise missiles and a few drones.
Next question. We've come into an era, and I want to go back to my talk at one point. In 1994, Newt Gingrich led the effort to zero out the Office of Technology Assessment. That was the group, it was the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment. That was a group that appraised technologies. And so a congressperson could say, hey, check out this, and they would study it and give a report would come back. And they were all public. And they did some amazing, I still have documents that they wrote back in the 80s. When you zeroed out our capacity to think through technologies, it's a little bit like, I mean, the metaphor won't be perfect, but it's a little bit like on a high mountain road at night turning off your headlights. You're on a windy road, cliffs all around you. You did what? You turned off the headlights? So now we've got this world where drones, and drones are cheap, and they're democratized. If you want to cause havoc, you can get yourself a drone, and if you want to spread, let's say, some kind of virus or bacteria with that and cause havoc, that's doable. And then you think about, I had a project at the US DoD a few years back, and 5 or 6 years back, and they were developing or talking about drones like your thumb, bumblebee size, with a range of 3 miles that can kill, surveil, infect. And think of flooding, and cheap to make, think of flooding a sports stadium with drones like that, the havoc you would cause. And then, of course, nuclear weapons and all this other stuff. We have democratized the capacity for terror. And there is no individual solution. There's not one of you in this room that can do a damn thing about it to protect yourself. If you're victimized by this, you're just going to be a victim, another body on the floor. So this is, again, something only governments coming together can solve. That's why the strategic arms limitation treaties were so important, and they've been trashed. That's why we have to collectively come together to solve those kind of problems. That doesn't answer your question, but I share your sense of terror, and I don't think there's an answer to your question. You're saying the technology, but if this room, if we decide to close the doors, turn off all the recording devices, and we constitute ourselves as a terrorist group, this group here, there's enough brain power in this room, we could cause havoc. And that's what's happened. So we see it now with computers, hacking. The terrifying thing about the Russian attacks on American democracy and all those democracies, starting with Estonia, the terrifying thing is that in their military doctrine, that precedes military action, hard military action. That's not me, that's their doctrine. They say it bluntly in those terms. So these are, and as part of your curriculum here, I don't know how we introduce this back into the curriculum. But there was a time, not all that long ago, when we educated people to understand technology as what it can do and what it can do to us, what it can do for us and what it can do against us. And we need people, we become technological fundamentalists. You know, most of the conversations about technology are of the gee whiz sort. Look what my smartphone will do. Well, yeah, it'll also surveil you. It'll also track you down. My wife was in the store, made one comment, and the next thing she knew, she was getting ads on her smartphone. Somebody had heard her do that, and then so it was, and you've all had that experience too. So the gee whiz part of the technology is, but we need to begin thinking about this. Where this fits in a college and university curriculum, I think, is important. It's not a matter of being for or against technology, but being thoughtful about how you deploy it. And you don't, one thing that Jacques Odieu, the great writer on technology, pointed out is you never buy a technology. We don't buy a smartphone. You buy a system, a whole system that generated that smartphone. So you don't buy the artifact. You buy into a worldview of that. And I share your concern for that. Any last question?
Yeah. One last question. Okay, right here.
What advice would you give students that want to push new policy?
Wait, say it again.
What advice would you give students that want to push new policy and ideas when it comes to climate change?
Well, I mean, you've done a lot here, and I think you've done a lot of things here that have been going on elsewhere at Oberlin. And our job as faculty, or my job as a faculty person, was to help equip you with the kind of skills, thinking skills. It wasn't to indoctrinate you with some view, but help you think through issues. Because you got 4 years, incredible 4 years at a great school, with great faculty, and great facilities here. Take the advantage, take the time to learn everything you can. and become the most thoughtful person you can possibly be. And then we brought in students to work on the Lewis Center, the first building I showed here at Oberlin. That got orphaned to me, and so it was my job to raise money for it and get it done. So what we did on that building was to say, this is going to be an educational project. So we opened that building design process to student involvement. We had about 250 kids that worked on that building. And what that did was to show them that, A, things are possible. And I don't know what you do about all these big things, drones and climate change. I mean, that gets in an order of magnitude beyond my limited intelligence. But if you reduce this to the size of a 14,200 square foot building on an acre site, that's small enough we can get our head around. And those kids did data safety searches for materials because we eliminated all the toxic materials in that building. They figured out how to power it by sunshine. They worked with an incredible design team that included people from NASA and 3 engineering firms and a couple of architectural firms. The whole design team was 22 people and 250 students. And what that did, you know, I don't worry about a lot of things. I worry mostly about despair. That you'll look at all this stuff and, oh God, there's just no hope for me. And it isn't one thing. It isn't just climate change. It's dozens of things now that you have to think about. So we need an integrated approach to all of this. But what I think happens at places like Catawba College is your engagement in what goes on all of a sudden takes those important issues down to a scale you can understand. You can get your head around it, you can get your hands in it, and you can solve those things. So carbon neutrality, we're to get carbon neutral. What we did is we had students working in Oberlin on making Oberlin a carbon neutral city. We're 90% of the way there. The college will be carbon neutral, that's a town. The college will be carbon neutral in another decade or so. But getting students involved in crunching numbers and understanding options and working with the maintenance people and the faculty and the people who know lots of things. You put a team together around solving a problem. And people are really good at that. We are really given an opportunity, we are really good at solving problems. But you have to create the structure. So to capsize, or capsulize that, maybe capsize, read. Get engaged, get the best education you can, become the best professional. If you want to be an engineer or banker or whatever, figure out how to do those things and be really, really good in your profession. Now, while you're here, I think the college is incumbent on all of us to give students opportunities to actually engage in doing something, making a difference, even a small difference. You find out that the world is still rich in possibilities. You know, we're not condemned to go over the cliff. You know, that's a choice we will make, maybe by default, maybe by actively, but that's a choice, and we can choose other ways to do this. Anyway, thanks for that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks, Ron.
We really appreciate it. He's doing amazing stuff, and we need to get out there and support him and do a lot to really push the ideas you're involved in. We're so lucky to have someone like you that is focused in this area, and I think where you're heading is such a great direction. And I don't know what we can do, but if we can figure out ways to support you, I hope we can.
I'm sure you can. Thank you, John. Thanks to all of you.